I'm Joyce Kennedy from People and Pollinators Action Network and the steering committee of CPN. And I'm so excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Lena Freij. She's here from the Santa Monica, California office of the Natural Resources Defense Council. And there she's an attorney and a policy advocate working to reduce and eliminate the use of harmful pesticides. PPAN has been thrilled to partner with Lena and her colleagues at NRDC, and we are working on something called the Seed We Need campaign. There's a table outside, so please visit that as well. And Lena's going to tell you all about that, along with the solutions that this can provide. Before joining NRDC, Lena was an honors attorney fellow at EPA Region 10, where she brought enforcement actions against violators of air, waste, pesticide, and toxics statutes. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science and policy from California State University, Long Beach, and earned her JD from UCLA Law School. Lena, we're so glad you're here. Welcome to Colorado and the Colorado Pollinator Summit.
Now is it on? Yes, it is. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joyce. It's such an honor to be here. I know you've heard a little bit about neonicotinoids or neonics already. I am unfortunately going to scare you even further. But I promise I will end this with some hope, some vision for the future, and ways that I really think everybody in this room can get involved to choose a better future for Colorado, right? Where we don't use these insecticides unnecessarily. So yes, as Joyce mentioned, I work on trying to reduce or eliminate the unnecessary use of pesticides, but especially neonics, and particularly their use as a seed treatment, which is what I'm going to get into in this presentation. And the reason we really care about neonics, they're the most widely used insecticide in the world. They are super duper toxic to wildlife, but especially to our bees, and they're pretty much ubiquitous in our environment. So I know everybody in this meeting already knows, bees are super, super important, right? 1 every 3 bites of food that we take are reliant on pollination, and about 75% of the world's top 100 crops need pollination to survive. So to give you an illustration of bees, here's a picture of a normal grocery store, right? This probably looks pretty familiar to all of us. This is a world with bees, right? And this is that same grocery store in a world without our bees. So we'll still have some food, but we're not gonna get that same nutritional value. We're not gonna have the same access to the diversity of food that we have now. It's gonna be a lot harder to get those essential nutrients. And even beyond food security, we have to think about our natural world too, right? Pollinators are essential to 85% of flowering plants, and that comprises most plants. So beyond just our food security and the cost of food, we have to think about whole ecosystems. We have to think about the whole world. And that's a concern because about 18 years ago, beekeepers across the world started seeing mass die-offs of their colonies. Before that point, beekeepers were losing around 10 to 15% of their colonies, just on average, but that changed around 2006, where it jumped to around 30, 40, 50%, sometimes 60%. And those numbers have really continued at that high and alarming rate since then. And of course, there are a number of reasons that we see losses to bees, right? We have climate change, we have habitat loss because of monoagriculture, we have parasites and diseases, but my work talks about neonics. And particularly, their use as a seed treatment, these really scary Skittles. They are the thin coating of these pesticides on crop seeds. They make it this fluorescent color to tell you that they're scary. I think it's a really huge disservice to the color pink. But just to get an understanding of scale here. So Colorado has about 1 million acres of corn. On average, per acre, 30,000 of these seeds are planted. So just to get this is why we target seed treatment. So the most widespread use by far of these insecticides, but of course, we also target urban and landscape uses as well. And so to get in a little bit about the way that neonics work. So they are systemic. This means that they can permeate plant tissues. So they make the whole plant toxic. When they're used as a seed treatment, as the plant grows, it takes up those toxins. So the leaves, the fruit, the pollen, the nectar, all becomes toxic to bees or any creature that consumes it. You can't wash it off. So it turns out also that these seed treatments are not even a very efficient way of using the pesticides. Only about 2 to 5% actually get absorbed by the target crop. The other 95% stays in the soil. It can stay there for years, and it can also move around in the environment really well because these pesticides are water soluble. So rain, lawn watering, irrigation, these pesticides are moving around, they're getting into waterways, and they're contaminating nearby plants. And so because of this, they're just about everywhere. Neonics have made agriculture 48 times more harmful to insect life since their creation. And this graph just really just shows the magnitude of the neonic problem that we're dealing with. That light blue bar is the harmfulness of neonics to insects, attributable to neonics. That dark blue bar is all other insecticides combined. So this is why my work is trying to reduce the size of that light blue bar. So what does this add up to in terms of ecological impacts? I know you've heard a fact like this thrown around. The NRDC estimation is actually a little bit worse than what you've heard. We estimate that one neonic-treated corn seed has enough active ingredient to kill 250,000 bees or more. And they kill bugs by attacking their nervous system. So basically, they make them twitch uncontrollably before becoming paralyzed and dying. If you've ever seen a bee that's been acutely poisoned by neonics, that's probably what you've experienced. And they're actually called neonics because they are new nicotine-like substances. So they literally attach to receptor sites in nerves. And so, of course, these chemicals are harmful to our bees. They're also harmful to other insect life. It's leading to a lot of what people are talking about, the insect apocalypse. I know a lot of you can probably relate to this. I remember as a kid, I would go on these road trips with my family, and I remember having to use the window wipers because all these bugs were getting on our windshield. When was the last time you remember having to do that? I really can't remember. Nowadays it just really doesn't happen anymore. Scientists recently found the population of monarch butterflies fell by 90% in the last 20 years. That's 900 million individuals. And there have been a couple really big studies recently that evaluated the impacts of different causes of pollinator declines against one another. And the first is a butterfly study that came out June of last year by the really wonderful and excellent Dr. Nick Haddad. He's probably in here. Hi, Nick. Hope you don't talk too much about this. But this study identifies, what's great about this study is it identifies neonics as the primary factor associated with losses. And this study in particularly calls out seed coatings as the major driver associated with butterfly declines. So especially for monarchs, and that's above all other factors, right? Above climate change, habitat loss, even other pesticides. And the second study from last August looked at wild bees and similarly drew a connection between increased neonics and wild bee declines because, as we all know, our wild bees don't benefit from the same privileges of our honeybees, right? Honeybees are managed as livestock. Our wild bees aren't getting that kind of assistance and intervention. So the clear signal from both of these studies is that neonics, especially neonic seed coatings, are the lead factor associated with pollinator declines, and they're really the driver behind a lot of these losses. And shockingly, even the federal government seemed to agree. And I hope this isn't too controversial to say, but it doesn't really matter the administration when it comes down to pesticides. Historically, they've kind of always been pretty bad about it, but even under an unfavorable administration a couple years ago, EPA made this really unprecedented finding that neonics are driving over 200 species towards extinction. And for folks who are unfamiliar with the Endangered Species Act, jeopardizing even just one species is in violation of the ESA. So we've really never seen a finding like this that implicates more than 200 species. Really just speaks to how fundamentally destructive neonics are to ecosystems. And so these losses, this contamination, right, it extends far beyond just our pollinators. Neonics are damaging and harmful to whole ecosystems and a real driver for biodiversity loss. One key study here was actually from Japan. Researchers there looked at zooplankton and If you're not familiar with zooplankton, they're these cute little guys. They are basically water bugs, and they're super, super important to aquatic food webs. And with this study, they had a data set going all the way back to 1980, which is super rare, where in the early 90s, in this otherwise super sustainable fishery, the zooplankton and the fish that ate the zooplankton just completely died off. The fishery collapsed. And a few years later, authors were able to make connections from those die-offs to the introduction of neonics in nearby agriculture. And unfortunately, we're seeing neonics in water bodies across the US, which raises concerns for aquatic ecosystems, and we're already seeing them in Colorado. We actually commissioned an expert report in this July that came out, and we found that neonics are in our groundwater, they are in our surface water, with one monitoring well 100 times over the chronic benchmark for aquatic life. If you're interested in reading more about this, I will link our website at the end of this, and I also have a pamphlet of the executive summary if you want to come find my table. And then the unfortunate thing about this too is that conventional water systems do not filter out neonics, so if that wasn't scary enough. Neonics also harm things with spines. We see very similar impacts to birds. Neonics are linked to bird loss and bird biodiversity. We see it especially with insect-eating birds, and I'm sure folks here are pretty familiar with that Cornell report that came out a couple years ago. There were 30% of bird loss over the last 50 years, and after that study came out, researchers took that data set and separated it out by birds where insects are an essential part of their diet and where insects are not an essential part of their diet. And if you look, I mean, where the birds are not essential, they're doing okay. You know, they're hanging in there. But for the birds where insects are essential, they're really suffering. And sadly, this is most birds, right? Most birds are insectivorous. And neonics are also directly toxic to birds. They're not only just starving them, but even just consuming one neonic-treated corn seed can kill a small songbird. And if you wonder if birds eat agricultural seeds, they definitely do. They can eat them directly in the soil after mechanized planting. There are seed spills. They could dig them up and eat them and eat the young sprouts. And we have to keep in mind that these chemicals have long-term impacts, right? Even for birds that are larger, or maybe they didn't consume as much of the chemicals, sublethal effects also create very serious problems for birds. They can accumulate in the liver for both adult birds and little baby chicks. It can hurt their immune systems. A recent study demonstrated that even low-level neonic levels, neonic exposures can starve small songbirds. They can delay migration. They can decrease reproductive success. And things start to get really scary when we think about mammals. I know Dr. Lundgren got into this a little bit, but there have been a couple studies that have made the connection between neonic exposures and birth defects in white-tailed deer, right? Really just unusual deformities, like you mentioned, strange things going on with their organs and deformed jaws. And of course, this is a big concern ecologically speaking, but deer are big mammals, and we are big mammals. We are also big mammals that are impacted by neurotoxic chemicals. And we know that neonics on farms, as well as even seed treatment facilities, raise a pretty significant workplace hazard for folks. There was even a recent study that came out from one of our staff scientists at NRDC, and she looked into the human poisoning incidents for neonics, and the takeaway from this study is that hundreds of people have been acutely poisoned by neonics. But we're also learning that chronic exposures, as well as exposure to babies early in life, is a really big problem. Using 2016 data, CDC research found that neonics are in half of the US population, and we know this by a biomonitoring study. So there was neonics, or like the breakdown of neonic chemicals found in people's urine. And a more recent study found them in over 95% of 171 pregnant women, with the highest levels in Hispanic women. And the really scary thing about that study was that each year the levels were getting higher. So these women were getting more exposed each year that went on. And this is a pretty big concern because studies suggest that neonics can increase the risk of developmental and neurological damage in humans. I think a lot of that science is in its infancy now. I really think we're going to start to see more and more of this coming out. But even just using population studies, because controlled studies of people are unethical, even those population studies are showing that neonic exposures are associated with birth defects of the heart and brain, decreased sperm count and testosterone, I mean, it's pretty consistent with what we've been seeing in a lot of the animal testing. So, given all of these impacts, is it worth it for farmers? Take a guess. No. How did you know that's where I was going with this? They're not. Studies have shown that on average, there is no economic benefit to farmers. And this also goes for home gardens, for golf courses. Neonics are just basically unnecessary across the board. And because they are so commonly used, farmers are actually struggling to find seed without neonics, without systemic insecticides. They're really just left without much of a choice in any of this. And a big reason for that is because the market is controlled by a very small handful of multinational corporations that are really just depriving farmers of choices and options. And these are options that could benefit, of course, our pollinators, our water, our own health, but even their own bottom lines. So, how is the world responding to this? Well, the EU banned pretty much all outdoor uses of neonics. As of 2018, most of the neonic uses in Europe have been banned, which is great. And Canada has also imposed pretty significant restrictions. Ontario and Quebec have instituted what's called a verification of need program, or a needs-based program, where farmers who want to use a neonic seed coating, they basically just have to get like a prescription. They have an agronomist come out, take a look at their crop, and if there's a demonstrated pest problem, then they can get a waiver to use a neonic treated seed. And since its implementation, neonic use has dropped to virtually nothing. There, corn seed, neonics were used on corn seed about 100% of the time, soybean about 50%. After they instituted this program, it dropped to virtually zero. And there weren't any shifts to more harmful alternatives either. And the reason for this is they're not needed, right? Like I've said, they're just not necessary. The majority of seed treatments are not needed. And actually, a great thing was Quebec actually expanded their program this summer. First, it started off with just neonics. They now are not only just doing neonics, they're doing all insecticide seed coatings, which is fantastic. And so in the United States at the federal level, there's a lot going on with neonics, various statutes and processes, which I don't really need to get into all this detail, but I think the main takeaway is that there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. We've had layoffs, definitely delays in timelines, so I think it's certainly possible that a lot of these processes are going to be slowed or delayed. The food tolerance petition, that was my first lawsuit. Yay. Thank you. My name's on the paper, guys. We filed a petition in 2020 basically asking EPA to revoke food tolerances for neonics, and they didn't respond for 5 years. So we filed an unreasonable delay suit. So hopefully we get a response from them soon. So at the state level, what's happening at the states? So there's been movement across the country to, about a dozen or so states have done this. Colorado is one of them, to make neonics restricted use. So basically, they can't be sold on the shelves of Home Depot or Lowe's. You have to have a special license to sell them. They can be used by lawn care companies or certified applicators. New Jersey also made some moves to completely ban neonic lawn and garden uses. And New York and Vermont have actually instituted the exact same program in Quebec that I talked about, that needs-based program. New York passed it almost 2 years ago. Vermont followed shortly after them. New York's program will be instituted in 2029, which is exciting. And so to dig a little bit deeper into what's happening in Colorado, I think all of y'all probably know about this. We recently published the Native Pollinating Insects Health Study. So many fantastic people in this room are responsible for that, so thank you. And reducing risk from pesticides is listed as a priority for the state. And on top of that, Colorado also became the first state very recently to offer a tax credit to farmers who do not use neonic seed treatments. This is a choice, and this was an effort led by NRDC and our partners, our coalition, just to get this qualified stewardship practice as part of this. And just a few months ago, CDA voted unanimously to approve the tax credit rule. So really, really great step there. Yeah. It's great, but we can't stop there. There's more. So that a wonderful program that I told you about that New York and Vermont and Quebec is doing, we're trying to bring that to Colorado. We actually are bringing a bill next year, and our proposal is to try to open up that market, right? We're trying to put a farmer-centered focus on this, right? Because farmers have been deprived of choices and options. So again, bringing that need-based program where if a farmer wants to use a neonic seed treatment, They can. They just have to have an agronomist or somebody come out and show that there is a demonstrated pest problem. And again, we're anticipating to see very similar results as Quebec. We think this really could reduce use around 80, 90+% of the neonic use in the state. So if you're wanting to learn more about our campaign, you can use this QR code. You can sign up to take action and just be involved. There's also, again, all the resources and more that I talked about in this presentation, all linked up there. And you can also find me at our table. But other ways to get involved, so in addition to just staying in touch, you can email me directly. I'm nice. I'll also be at my table again. You can't escape me, unfortunately. You can also contact your representatives. You can email them. That's great. I love when you call them. I think that's even better. Or try to get an appointment with them. I know some people are not as transparent about that. But if you call your representatives, I promise they want to hear from you. And if you tell them you want to see them take action on neonics, they will note that. And if enough people are calling them, they will want to do something about it. And also, if there are other folks that you think might be interested in this, let me know. If you liked my presentation, I like giving it, and I can give it to other people too. So there are other folks that you think this might resonate with. I'm really happy to connect with them. We are definitely looking to build more movement around this campaign, so I welcome any and all ideas. So thank you.